People spend a huge portion of their lives on the very noble cause of trying to be the happiest versions of themselves. And it can often feel like this super, unrealistic uphill battle, especially in the modern age where our lives are being, sucked into the couple of inches in front of our faces, and it's just consumed by a few thousand pixels at a time. So many people will attempt this journey of happiness without truly understanding what makes them happy or trying to have a deeper understanding of that. And, in my one of my scrolling journeys where I was sucked into the pixels in front of my face, I stumbled upon a way of figuring out my happiness, and I think it really works. And it comes in the form of an equation, and you can apply this equation to your own life. You can make a lot of sense about what makes you happy and inversely unhappy. So today I'm going to give you that equation, and I'm going to try and explain it in a way that you can apply it to your own life, because the equation, while extraordinarily simple, does work in a lot of circumstances. There are a few things where I think that the equation can break down, and it's important to recognize a couple of those different scenarios so that you can apply it hopefully to your own life. But if you research, the equation to happiness, you'll find a few theories. However, the one I'll discuss today, I think, is the most applicable and the easiest to understand. And by no means is this an original thought of mine. The first time I heard this idea was through a guy named Dr. Arthur Brooks. And he's one of those guys. He's been on a bunch of podcasts. He's probably written a bunch of books, and I haven't looked into him that much, but I have listened to a bit of his stuff. And he presents an equation to explain happiness. And the equation more or less goes along the lines of what you have divided by what you want equals happiness. Haves divided by wants equals your happiness. So if you paid any attention in school, more particularly maths, and know anything about fractions or division, then the way that this works is one of two ways. To get happier, you have more or less two options. And the really common way that we think about it is have more equals happiness. And so the equation would suggest that if you have more things, that you will be happier. So have another holiday, have a nice watch, have another drink, have, $1 million, and you'll be happy. The other way, which is the inverse of that, and I guess much harder in practice, is that if you want less, you will also be happy. So the two options are have more or want less. And Dr. Brooks gives the example of an unhappy billionaire when he explains this, which helps us understand a flaw in the human thinking, which largely unravels the equation. And it makes it a bit paradoxical in a sense. But he gives this example of a billionaire, and the billionaire initially wants $1 billion. So they started out as not a billionaire, but they want $1 billion. And when they finally have $1 billion, they aren't happy, despite the equation suggesting that they moved something from a want to a have, which should, in theory, make you happier. But the reality is that the billionaire now wants another billion or 10 billion, and their want for more cancels out their gratitude for their have. This then becomes a paradox where if having more always results in you wanting more, you will never be satisfied with what you have, and the more you have, the more you want. So when you look at this example alone, you can kind of see that the equation can only explain some simple circumstances where we're able to evaluate happiness, because it crumbles under this billionaire's greed. However, I truly do think that the equation is really good at explaining our responses to events. To kind of bring it back to a couple of examples that I think are really good at explaining how simple it is to evaluate your happiness. I'm going to talk about like a sporting club, right? And I barrack for a certain sporting club every week. I'm not going to say it because they lose all the time. But kind of the way my happiness works around this is really simple, and it's explained so well through the equation. So each week, I obviously want my team to win. And when they lose, I want them to win even more. And I don't have a win. So each week that they lose, I become more frustrated and unhappy because my wants keep increasing and I don't have anything to show for it. And inversely, this doesn't happen very often, but when they do win, I have a win. and I'm ecstatic, I'm happy. And I think that that's kind of a very similar and it's kind of really natural response to this scenario that you can probably apply to your own lives, especially in terms of like barracking for something. And kind of the same thing, happens, if you study really hard and all you want is a job in that field that you've been studying for. When that want turns into a have and you get that job, in the field that you've, really wanted to work in for a long time and you have that, it makes real kind of clear sense as to why you were happy. A want turned into have. Equally, when something moves from a have to a want, it explains why those scenarios are so unpleasing and unhappy. I think everyone would probably be pretty filthy if their car gets stolen, right? And if you take that example, your car gets stolen, you had a car, right? But now you don't have a car, so your haves have decreased, and now you probably want a car, right? You might want revenge, you might want justice, you might want all these things, and you become deeply unhappy because your haves turn to wants. And the same thing can happen, if you go through a breakup with a girlfriend or a boyfriend or some sort of partner. You had that partner and now you're left wanting one. So it's kind of, it's really good at explaining some of these simple scenarios. I think this then becomes a really interesting thought experiment to apply to your own life to determine this best course of action to become happier. And I think as I've applied it to my own kind of life and scenario and thought about it a lot, I think there are two things that you need to be considerate of to understand the equation a little bit more. Because obviously we know that in some circumstances we can see why we're happy and why we're unhappy, like the ones we just mentioned, but that billionaire example is kind of a difficult one. So if we go back to that idea of a billionaire where they have an extraordinary amount, and let's change this billionaire and let's stack it even more into a scenario where they should be really happy. So let's say they're actually not that greedy, and they have an extraordinary amount, they have everything they could ever ask for, and they want kind of not that much, right? Because they have so much, but they're still unhappy. So this obviously contradicts the rule, because if you have a lot and you want not that much, you should be extraordinarily happy. The thing that is likely going on here and might explain, that billionaire's theory is that this person probably has no appreciation for what they have and they have no gratitude for what they have. So I think when you're applying this to your own life, if you have no appreciation or gratitude for your haves and you're unaware of how much good there is in your life or some of the small things, some of the wins, then those haves become really obsolete and you're kind of left with nothing there. And if you again understand the fractions, if you have 0 divided by anything, it's still 0. So you're left with nothing. A big example that we can use to explain the kind of inverse of this is if you take, like a monk for an example, who in theory has very little. And let's say that they're a hardcore monk right there and nothing. They just have the material on their back, and that's kind of what we maybe consider as modern haves, is these material things. So even though by our modern standards we might think this monk more or less doesn't have anything, I think most people are well aware that monks are widely regarded as these extraordinarily happy and blissfully spiritual people. And I think a large part of this is that they are spending most of their day focusing on the present, and part of that is fostering an appreciation and gratitude for the things that are in front of them. So they're super appreciative of probably just that there's a blue sky out today, and that they've got a fresh cup of water, and that there's ground beneath their feet, and it could be a conversation with a dear friend, and all of a sudden they have immense gratitude for small things. And these are haves that they have, and these far outweigh any desires and wants that might foster, and you have an extraordinarily happy person. So I think if we recognize when you have a deep sense of appreciation and gratitude for something, that turns into something far more prominent in our life and will no doubt make us happy. And probably all of you will have that thing. And I think for me, that's probably like coffee. Like I'm absolutely obsessed with coffee. And, some people will look at coffee and go, it's a means to an end, it perks you up in the morning. But like for me, it just excites me. It means so much to have that routine in the morning. You wake up excited to brew a fresh espresso and try and make some fun latte art. And it genuinely makes me happy. And it's like, yes, it's something small, it's something insignificant, but I've assigned the value to it. And I think, we can determine the value of things, and it means that coffee that I have is far more significant, and means that in that scenario that I'm really happy in that place, even though it's not that deep or important. But the same thing can be applied to kind of anything. You can have a lot, but if you don't appreciate it, then you kind of have nothing. And we determine the value of these things. That brings me to kind of inverse of this equation. Now, I think it's easy to think of the inverse as just wanting less. I'll stop wanting the shiny house. I'll stop wanting a Lambo. I'll stop wanting a new job or a computer or a girlfriend or whatever the content is that you're trying to get less of. And, you'll be happy, right? Because you want less. That means that your equation is improving. However, there is a big factor in our wants that can make them actually work for us. And we can definitely turn our wants into something that is quite satisfying and that can bring us a lot of joy. And I think that for me, when I think about it, and I think about the times that I'm happy, is obviously when you have things, but I also think that progress is something that is a huge factor in happiness. And so when you're making meaningful progress towards your wants, I think that they can turn into or become irrelevant in the equation, and you sort of have these wants that aren't actually making your life less happy. They're actually making your life more happy. And let's say that it's a common thing to want to save up money and go on holiday, and if you're saving $1 a week for a $10,000 holiday to Europe, let's say, it's probably not going to feel like you're making much progress. It's probably a want that is really bogging you down and dragging you down, the same way that maybe, a house where, inflation is constantly going up and you're never making any progress to it. Whereas if you're making, able to save $200 a week and you're seeing genuine progress towards this goal that you have of the holiday, it can be really satisfying going on that journey and wanting something and slowly progressing towards it. So I think we shouldn't just say want less equals happy. I think we should evaluate what we want and determine whether we are making progress towards that. And that progress is also going to be satisfying, which we can get working in our favor in terms of this equation. So I've been just a happy guy, giving my thoughts about an equation that I think helps explain and helps us understand the happiness that humans feel, or that sense of unhappiness. And I challenge you to go evaluate your own scenario and even write it down. If you write down your haves and wants on a sheet of paper and, have a think about, what are the things that you could be more grateful for and your haves, and improve your haves, and, maybe strike a line through a couple of those wants, or figure out a way to make progress towards some of those wants. And I think that you'll realize that you are making a lot of progress and that you can be a happy person. And try and avoid that paradox. Don't get sucked into your haves resulting in more wants and you never being satisfied. Hope that everyone's happy. Hope you enjoyed.